it tea or whiskey, Dom?
Coffee.
See, I was
No,
hoping
it's
you'd
not.
say whiskey when we went live.
Whiskey and
No.
vodka in here. A whole
I've
beaker
just,
full of-
to be fair, I've literally just had a craving for a red wine. So after this, I'm going to have a red wine. Evening, everybody. Yeah, there's no dry January for me. Good evening, everybody. Hope we're all doing well. Neil here from Dan and Neil Estate Agents with Mr. Barrel, the Reading agent, and the one and only Dom from the Money Guardian. You might recognise us from episodes such as Cut the Jargon, but we are here for episode 1 of Rates and Ladders. The name, evening gents, the name has had a great success and a great hit. So credit to Dom down below me here on my screen for coming up with a brilliant name. And where were we when we came up with that brilliant idea and brilliant name?
Where we always are. The
Where we always
Shinfield
are.
Arms.
The
Our
Shinfield
favourite
Arms.
place in the whole world.
I prefer to think of it as a working lunch. A working lunch.
It's where all great ideas are made and formed, isn't it? Down the pub. So yeah, worked out well. But no, really excited about this one, gents. And
Definitely.
Obviously, Matt, credit to you. You and Dom have been doing your chats. Dan and I were doing a lot of chats with Dom. We sort of slacked off towards the back of the year. So let's not get complacent. Let's give the public what they want, which is our faces and our advice and Dom's hairline. So what we're going to be doing is, as always,
there is a bit of glare. You're right.
There is. I'm liking it. Those spotlights are great. But yes, if you're watching this live, jump in. As always, throw any questions in. We're here to give you some advice and ultimately give you the updates as and when they happen. So quicker than the ITV news. But yeah, first and foremost, gents, welcome. Good evening. Obviously, we've got a few bits to go through. So I know Dom's going to give us a bit of an insight, but Matt, what's going on with the wonderful world of you?
So I imagine, like yourself, it's the new year. We're catching up. We're seeing what's going on with the market. Q4 last year was very turbulent. Is that the word we'll use?
Yeah, it switched, didn't it? It switched quite quickly.
Everything, yeah. I feel like from September onwards, nobody really knew if they were coming or going. But now I feel a sense of calm. I've been reading up a few of the property reports, which I'm sure we'll go through as we chat along, but it does seem like things are starting to become a little less chaotic. So obviously this is good news for us and for the property market as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's I've definitely been using that terminology of the dust settling, the nerves and people not knowing what was going on sort of back end of last year. There's people out there, like always, that still want to move. So it's going to happen. It's going to keep going. So, yeah, I think bring on 2023. Is that the same in the mortgage world, Dom? What's going on in the wonderful world of money?
We were no different to you guys, really, in terms of October. Everyone got nervous after the Truss hand grenade is how I'm describing it. And I think something that the banks that people don't really see is that a lot of the lenders wrote their targets really early last year because there was a rush for Help to Buy because that scheme was shutting down. It was lots of people were rushing to remortgage earlier. They were ditching out the fixed deals and fixing for longer before the rates started to climb. So a lot of them had written target.
Yeah.
So they weren't really pricing to attract business. But you guys would have seen, I shared some of this stuff with you, that there is still appetite. There's lots of cash out there that banks need to get out the door. So there's a bit of a rate war starting. We get daily emails now about fixed rates dropping for new and existing customers or that sort of thing. So long may that continue, really. And it seems to be the case that most fixes are now sort of settling, starting with a 4, which they were starting with the high 5s in the October sort of phase. So we have seen quite a bit of movement in a positive sense.
Yeah, it seems that way across the board with the numbers I've seen and everyone doing their usual throwing out numbers. It seems like the numbers are starting to drop again, and there's a bit more reassurance. Really, everyone was worrying whether it's going to go 6 and above, and it was obviously very close. But no, I'm liking the way it's going.
I had a visit last week from I'm not going to name them because it wouldn't be fair, but from a very, very big high street lender. We get these visits all the time from the business development guys there, just telling us what's happening from their hilltop, so to speak. And they were very positive about the market, and they did not agree that we're going to see any sort of property crash. And I made a really good point. I think it's worth mentioning here that even if there is a correction in values, it only takes us back to just before COVID anyway.
Yeah.
You know, the market was inflated as a result of the stamp duty holiday anyway, and the race for space and all the very good reasons that people had to try and change their living arrangements.
Yeah.
But it's just going to kind of re-equalize, and they believe the market size to be where it was sort of at the end of 2019 in terms of value and volume. So, you know, we all made a living in 2019, didn't we? As far as I can remember. And I think, you know, people it being less frenetic and less, you know, 20 people queuing up to view one property. I think we'd all probably appreciate a little bit of calm now, and you know,
you're not wrong.
A little bit of sadness. Yeah.
It was never going to last forever, wasn't it? I think lots of the doom and gloom headlines of last year, and you remember early last year when we were seeing annual property prices up 10%. I think it got to 12% at one point last year. We were seeing the annual prices were up, you know, and that was never going to carry on forever, was it? So I think this is expected.
No. Yeah, and I've been saying it to a lot of people because obviously the age-old question is, what's the market doing? What's happening now? I've got people that I went out to see a year ago or 6 months ago that are now reaching back out, and I'm saying similar things. In my opinion, marketing prices haven't changed too much. They're fairly similar. It's just you don't have, as you touched on there, Dom, you don't have 20 people climbing over each other to offer well over asking price like they were. And it was carnage. It was very much a seller's market. And
yeah, I
spoke to a buyer earlier on, and she said in the last 6 months they were just constantly losing out on properties they're ready. So that was I'm sure you'd agree, Matt, that was the conversation we were having with pretty much everyone at that time. I can't stand the chance. I can't get anything, basically.
Yeah, and it was the same. You know, a house would go on the market immediately. There were 10, 15 people who wanted to view it, and that's just not normal, is it?
No.
I made the example speaking to Ryan the other day. I'm not sure what your opinion would be on this, Neil. I kind of feel like prices have already fallen a little bit. Would you say maybe a house for, I used for example with Ryan, that a house on the market for 400k maybe might have sold for 425 12 months ago.
Yeah.
Maybe that house sells for 410 or 415 now. So it's not a small decrease in percentage terms, but it is still a decrease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd agree. And as I was touching on there, that I don't think the marketing prices have necessarily fluctuated too much. It's just how much people are willing to pay over. So you bang on, rather than someone spending or offering 25 grand over because they know they've got 20 people behind them waiting to offer. They're just being a bit more coy with it. They're a bit more cautious with it. Sorry. So houses are still selling, and houses are still selling at the right price. They're just not selling at an inflated price like they were. So and for most people, and I say this all the time, for most people, it's all relevant and relative. If they're moving within that market, you're going to get a little bit more when you can offer a little bit less on the other ones. So
I think one of the things that will slowly emerge this year is that people will get used to, I hate the term the new normal, but it is the new normal when it comes to lending rates. You know, we're not likely to see very soon a return to sub 1% base rates, because that's not the world that we live in. And so, you know, we're now at rates that were sort of prevalent in 2007. And it's going to take time for people to adjust to that, because they were very, very low for a very, very long time. And so the human psyche needs to familiarize itself with it, with the new normal. But once they do that, and we see a bit less competition for properties, maybe a bit of a softening in prices. People will still be able to afford it. It's a case of whether they want to afford it or not.
Yeah.
But if you take the flip side of the pressure on rental property availability, which is horrific, quite frankly, the pressure on the upwards pressure on rental values is up. The competition, I see this all the time on social media, people looking for properties to rent and they're just not there. That's a problem, and some people who are thinking, well, I'll hold off and I'll rent because I don't, buying's expensive. But actually, if you're not secure and your rent's going up every year, that might force some people to think, what, I think it might be the right time for me to buy now.
Yeah.
So there's just going to be this transition. Everybody will transition at their own pace, but they will get used to the fact that it's a new lending market and they'll engage with it when the time is right for them. And I think, from our perspective, we just need to be here to help and guide people as best we can when they reach out and ask for help.
Yeah, I think everyone's got a different timeline, haven't they?
I've stunned you into silence. Oh, that's not very often, is it?
doesn't often happen. I think everyone's got their different timeline, haven't they? And but at the same time, you bang on. Sometimes the changing market forces someone's hand, doesn't it? So for whichever way that might be, I personally think, and obviously Don was touching on the changing rates and stuff like that a minute ago, but I personally think there's a lot of people that maybe bought 3-5 years ago that did have a good rate, that they stretched themselves a little bit too thin, that might end up struggling when it comes back around to remortgaging. Can they actually afford the change each month, which I think is where people are going to get a bit of a bite on the arse. Not sure what your view is on that, Dom, in terms of a mortgage sense. If he's still there.
Oh, we lost him.
He's got his dodgy signal again. What's your opinion on it, Mr. B?
Yeah, I think. Oh, you back, Dom?
Can you? Am I? I don't
know. You're back. You're back.
Am I back?
You're back.
Right. I don't know. I think it might be my signal, guys. I do apologise.
I think it might be.
I saw some stats on this. There's 1.4 million people reaching the end of a fixed rate deal this year. 57% of those people currently have a fixed rate that starts with a 2. Mm-hmm. It's likely that they'll be offered something that starts with a 4. Now, mentally, that's a big jump. And I'm encouraging everybody that's in that situation to not just take the offer that the bank sends you, because the banks want you to just press a button and switch. Get somebody to have a look at it for you, because there could be a demonstrably better deal elsewhere, or a different type of product that's offering you better value if you can hedge your bets a little bit. And you both know we've been doing a few tracker mortgages recently because they're better value with the fixes, and people are maybe in transition, if you like, and they want a bit of flexibility. And the beauty of some of those products is they come without early repayment charges. So, you've got some time to see where your position is before you decide to refix. So that's always worth taking some advice, because the risk is that you rush into something when actually there could be a better option. You just don't know it's there.
I think it's quite simply slow it down and speak to the right people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, question here for you, Dom, from Stuart. Have you seen the banks speed up their service and how quickly they deal with new applications?
Generally, it's pretty good compared to where we were last year. I think a lot of the heat's come out of their processing times, because they're not having to deal with these sort of fluctuating swap rates and deciding when to fix and all that type of stuff. I mean, there's still quite a bit of product movement, but it's product movement rate-wise in the right direction. There's the odd exception where lenders that were behind target, priced really aggressively towards the end of last year, obviously got hammered with applications, and then they don't have the capacity to catch up with it. But the high street lenders I've yet to come across one that's struggling currently. but who knows?
Cool. So much less congested than it was.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do a little screen share. I like my screen shares. I just want to show you. I saw this earlier on the Knight Frank website. Now, I hope everyone can see this okay. Just looking at the 5-year swap rate in reds, the average 75 LTV mortgage in blue, and then the base rate in green here. So I thought this was quite an interesting view to look at it like this. And I guess you could say we're at somewhat of a point of like, where do we go now? Base rate's going up, rates are coming down. I think the next meeting is 2nd of February, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that. Yeah, it's early Feb.
I'm always saying to people it's probably more useful to look at what the mortgage market's doing rather than looking at the house prices, because obviously the house price data is delayed, whereas the mortgage market is current.
Yeah, what you can see on that graph is, spot when Kwasi Kwarteng turned up with his tax giveaway that was all based on borrowed money. We knew the bank rate was rising anyway. They'd been doing it since December 21. But the market then just prices in risk massively. The spread between where the base rate is and the swap rate market just too wide, because it reflected the risk. And then you can see like confidence returning into the market, lenders pricing more aggressively, because they need to build margin on the swap rate is effectively what a lender has to pay another institutional lender to borrow capital, and then they add their margin on top. It's the simplest way I can describe it. But that's a bit more like it. The lender just needs to make profit over a period of time. But that blip, if you like, was all about risk. And we need to continue to see that stability carrying through.
So it's good. From looking at that, my assumption would be that ultimately the fixed rate's got to come back down and join it, hasn't it? It's got to sort of join the party, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the base rate is interesting. It's just what the Bank of England pays commercial banks to park their money there. Yeah. The swap rate is effectively what it's costing to switch a variable rate of interest for a fixed rate over a set time horizon, and that reflects the interbank lending averages per day. So banks have to lend money to make money. And if they're borrowing it at X%, they need to add a margin so that they make profit, because they're paying interest on the money that they're borrowing from someone else. The bank isn't always lending you its own money. It's borrowing the money to lend out. It's very, very complicated on the capital markets. But banks will adjust their margins depending on how they want to hit their target. Sometimes they'll be more aggressive than others. And at the moment, we're seeing a lot of competition, which I expected to see, because new year, new target, let's go. It's so long may it continue, really. But I don't think we should assume in the short term that fixed rates will go lower than starting with a 4, but they're starting to drift down towards the low 4s, and you've got other options like trackers and discounts that currently sort of mid to high 3s. So you've got to take, in my view, advice. The market's so complicated. You do it yourselfers, fine, you can probably do it yourself, but you may well be missing a huge opportunity to save yourself a bit of money over the long term.
Do you know what I've just, I've noticed there's obviously a lot of scaremongering with regards to when rates were going up by obviously the smallest amount, it was all hell's breaking loose. And now they're sort of trickling back down. It's silent, isn't it? It's just quiet.
Yeah.
But it is
good news doesn't sell, does it?
No, exactly. And it's making people panic.
You've hidden away in lots of media outlets is positive news, like inflation in the UK has peaked. It looks like it's peaked globally. Wholesale gas prices are now lower than they were at the start of the Ukraine war. Prices at the pumps are coming down. The Bank of England believes that inflation will fall rapidly as those energy prices drop, and that will ripple through over the first half of this year. So, but no one wants to. News outlets don't want to publish that good news. They want to focus on the misery because that's what sells. It has to be a disaster, otherwise no one's going to turn the page of the paper.
That's exactly
Which is a bit annoying because it drives fear drives the wrong decisions.
Yeah,
that's why we've got to be here, gentlemen, to push the good news. Just I know we were going to keep these short and sweet, but just to before we sign off, Ellen's just said here, what do you think is best in terms of securing rates or jumping on a tracker to ride out the next few years? In short terms, Dom, what would your answer be to that question?
It depends. And the reason it depends is based on each individual circumstances, their appetite for risk, their capacity for handling volatility, because you have to balance. The tracker might be better value than a fix today, but you've got to make sure it's the right sort of tracker that allows you to switch out without an early repayment charge. Otherwise, you're just as well fixing because you've got certainty. But you've got to have the financial resilience to cope with further increases in base that would affect the tracker rate. Similarly, you've got to have the same mindset which says I can afford that, and therefore if the economy is in trouble later in the year and the bank starts to pull back on rates, well then you win. But you've got to be able to cope with volatility. We are conditioned to fix. Everybody's mindset is I'm going to fix. The whole market's now been mixed up a little bit. But it's a very, when we recommend a tracker, it's a very, very detailed conversation with clients to understand their circumstances and make sure that they understand the pros and the cons and they feel able to cope with it. Otherwise, you may as well just fix and have none of the worries attached to it.
Mm.
Yeah, there's something about human nature, I think, that just likes the predictability of the same payment every month.
Yeah.
Mind you, you say that I had my gas on a what's it called? The prediction or whatever it's called. My mind's gone blank. I meant to put in what my gas readings are each month. Never do it. So I'm going to have one big hefty bill at some point.
Yeah. Do you have a smart meter?
I did, and then I just didn't like it, so I unplugged it.
No, it's terrible, especially when it's as cold as it is today.
Well, I don't want one because whenever I go around Dan's, he's sat in a jacket looking at his smart meter, going, "Look how much it's costing me." Whereas I'm just like, well, you know.
Yeah.
Looks like we've got another question in, guys.
We've got another question from Steve. Yeah. So again, Dom, all the questions for you this evening.
Mr. Popular.
Must be my lucky day.
The bank's been more flexible on affordability checks. What do you reckon?
I think we touched on this at the back end of last year as well, didn't we? Easy enough.
Yeah. It's challenging, but there is a bit of softening in certain circumstances. But they're sort of tinkering around the edges, really. So another big lender today has come out and said if you've got a credit commitment that will be paid off, some of them count it against you for affordability, even though you said you're going to pay it off, or they've said, well, we're going to discount it from our calculation now, which will push up the lending amount. Overwhelmingly, certainly for first-time buyers, the biggest challenge is deposit size. But affordability, again, the big high street lender that came in to talk to me last week said that there was some stuff in the pipeline, technical terms, stuff in the pipeline about trying to help people with affordability in different ways. So there is movement from some of the big banks around, where you can get 5.5 times income as opposed to the standard 4.5. So I think they will be trying within the affordability rules, if you like, to help people to maybe push the envelope a little bit. But as I kind of referenced earlier, it's got the lending criteria have got very, very complicated. So if you're a do it yourself or talking to your own bank, you might get a no, but actually there's loads of different options that we can go after in the market where we can potentially push the envelope. But there's just no way somebody who isn't active with the right research tools would be able to do it. Well, you probably could, but you'd burn hours, whereas we can do it in minutes, basically.
Yeah. So as always, speak to a broker.
100%. There's literally that. There used to be lots of talk about this would just become like a digital process, and machines would just churn this stuff out. It's actually getting more complex. It's getting more and more complicated as banks' appetites change. So you just give yourself the best chance. Just hand it off to someone and let them deal with it and come back to you with what's possible. Particularly if you're self-employed, the challenges for self-employed could continue around affordability and what lenders will accept.
I say it with everything. Always.
I hope that answers the questions.
Get someone that knows what they're doing. They're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that was a good 25-minute, 26-minute chat, gents. So,
Fab. We should do this again.
Yeah. Why don't we do it next Tuesday at 6
Good to be back. Good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, we will get back into good habits and be there for the people answering any questions and giving you some advice. So, as always, tune in. If you are watching this afterwards, feel free to drop any questions into the boxes and we will look into it and come back to you in one way, shape or form. But as always, gents, pleasure.
Nice to see you both. And we'll catch you again next week.
Indeed.
Peace and love. See you then.
Ciao for now.
Bye.
Okay, guys, look after yourselves. Cheers all.